Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And in this video I'm going to take you through how I've painted my Orc Commandos from the Kill Team Octarius box set. First Orcs I've painted probably since the early 2000s when Armageddon was out. I really enjoyed them. If you like what you're seeing on the screen here of the finished article, keep watching the video and I'll show you how I did it. And if you do enjoy what I'm doing on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, and also check me out, Adam's Hobby Stuff, on Instagram and Facebook. So let's crack on with the video. So just a quick note on building these models in super speed, as you see here. Pay real attention to what you're doing and where the pieces are. They've spread these pieces right across the sprues, which is the new method for, I suppose, making maximum use of the sprue and not wasting plastic and everything, so pretty good. But just one to watch that it can be quite awkward finding the parts. There'll be another point on that later because I managed to lose one. So I've started off with a metal base coat. So this is using lead belcher, which is a Citadel spray. I really like the effect. I've talked about it many times before, but that's what I kind of do with a lot of models lately for the last year or so. I've really enjoyed doing that. Now onto the skin, laying on a base coat of a fairly pale green, which is unusual. I've always gone for a dark green orc skin, but lately it seems to be the trend to go slightly paler, so we've done that, joined in, why not? It's always good to try something new when you're painting that's not kind of in your comfort zone. Now we're laying down a sort of military green colour onto the trousers. All the colours I'm going to use in this base coat stage, I'm trying to get colours that have a similar base tone to give that sort of camouflage look and sort of blending together. You'll notice there when I was doing the trousers, trying not to hit the stitching and things because we're going to do that a different colour later. Now moving on to kind of a uniform brown kind of colour onto the shirt and kind of underclothes. Any colours I use will be in the description down below. And I do use a mix of Vallejo and Games Workshop paint, so you can take inspiration or just, watch along and try there. Now we're using a green grey onto the strapping. You see this green grey, not quite the same colour as the skin, not quite the same colour as the trousers, but does share similar tones. And we're using this on all the straps, the webbing, those kind of things. Now you could, if you wanted, use the colour you've used for the trousers for all the webbing and things, because you do see military gear that is the same colour as webbing and trousers and that kind of thing. But I like to have a few different colours that share similar tones. Looks like you put more effort in, but also gives a that visual interest as well. Now, not to say you can't make mistakes here. So you see here I've moved on and done the black and the boots and things as well. Then noticed I'd missed some of the strapping. So I went back to that and did the strapping around the cables and also knocked onto the stitching that goes down the face mask or the gas mask there. So beauty of a wet palette or doing it in sessions is that you can fix mistakes kind of as you go along. Now onto some metallic layers. This is the only metallic we'll be painting on in the base layer because obviously we've used the spray that will do a lot of work for us. But we don't want it all just looking silver, so it's worth putting on anywhere there'll be vents, heat coming out, that kind of thing, and the brass kind of effect looks really quite effective on those spots and on the ammo cases, that type of thing. So a real popular for orcs is the red thing. Orcs believe red stuff goes faster, so really useful to bring that pop of colour into the model somewhere. I've chosen to do that on the gun casings here in particular. Now I know I said before about we want the commandos to look camouflaged and whatever, but you do want to bring a bit of that orkiness into there. So doing it on the gun cases, also pulling it onto the face masks and some of the symbols. So there's lots of kind of orky styled masks on them, bits on the weaponry, that type of thing. You could use that red on. I'm also choosing to use it on the dynamite that a lot of them are wearing and onto the grenades. Represents kind of the fact that these are, explosive, but also pulls the orc colour in. You could do the grenades lots of different colours, but I still want to keep it fairly, not muted, but not use too many different colours. Now onto the boss again, you've seen him, so you've seen all the different stages used on him. I'm picking out the teeth and the claws here, so I'm choosing to do the claws in an off bone colour and matching the teeth. You could do the claws in black, and I've seen that works quite well, but I like using it in the traditional bone colour. And also you can see there, it does take a couple of layers as you go. I've done teeth, then to claws, then back to teeth again. Bringing in another typical orky colour now, a nice vibrant yellow. I'm going to pick some of the symbols that we haven't done in red, and I've chosen to do those based on if I've used much red on the model. You can see here again a micro batch. So we put the yellow on one model, and while it's drying, go on to the next model, paint that symbol, and move back to the first one. There's nothing wrong with breaking down your batch painting into little micro batches as you're working through. Now it's just some final details. We've got lots of colours on the models, but it's picking out things like I've chosen to use some blue onto the face visors, and again onto the same as the goblin. So I've joined the goblin and the squig into these micro batches. And what we're doing as well, when you come to the squig in a second, done the base as desert yellow because that matches into the bases I've already made on a previous video. If you want to check those out, I'll link it down below. So it's tying those into the bases, tying the squig into the whole range. Now I've got on here, you can see a mix of colours onto this palette that I've mixed together. a standard green that we've used for the skin, a real bright green, and then a flesh colour. And then I've mixed those together. So the bright green, the dark greens have been mixed together in the middle, and the dark green and the flesh have been mixed together in the middle. And now it's dropping on some highlights before we do the wash layer. So we're using the 50-50 mix of the greens just to go any raised areas where the light would hit. And then we're going to take that 50-50 mix of the green and the flesh colour to go across the lips and any scars that are on them, and also going to drop that onto the knuckles. So it's not something I've seen before on orcs historically, that we'd use, you know, a human flesh tone on them. You'd always go much darker, have some real darker greens, but I think it's a really interesting line that workshops are taking, so I thought I'd give that a try. Now, I don't ordinarily highlight up before a wash layer, but I think this is going to look quite effective. Also dropping, as I said before, some of that flesh and green mix into the scar areas. Now, we're not looking at doing a proper kind of highlight here. We're not looking at this being perfection. What we're doing is we're dropping these on so that when the wash goes on, it's going to give us 4 or 5 tones, hopefully, across there. And then I chose to take some of that pure bright green, which is a real sort of vibrant scorpion green, and drop that on. Now that looks very vibrant at the moment, just sort of spreading it out a little bit, but it will tone down once we put a wash on. So what you're doing now really is giving the wash somewhere to settle, but also those real top tones we're putting on now will dull down a little bit. So not something I do on very many models, but I really like the chance to try something new on these orcs. And again, like I said, I've never ever seen an orc with a human flesh tone on them at all. So just a really interesting move from Workshop to go down that line, and definitely worth pushing yourself out your comfort zone when you're painting and try something different. Because I originally was going to go with a real dark green, because that's what I did last time I painted orcs, you know, early 2000s. So here's another example of stuff can go wrong. I mentioned before about pieces being real fiddly to find and scattered across the sprues. I could not find this piece for the life of me. And I did drop the sprue on the floor, and I assumed it had maybe pinged off. And it had actually, as the end. I was getting frustrated with the sprue, but it turns out it was on the floor. I found this piece. I'm week into painting these models. Well, that's no disaster. All I did was get a bit of super glue out. You want me to use plastic glue, glued it on, then painted it black at the end. So if you make a mistake with your models, don't worry, you can always recover it. I suppose this is the lesson. Now onto an ink wash stage. I quite frequently will wash the entire model with the same ink. Now, again, I wanted to try something different with these orcs, so I've taken a Workshop shade, gone for a dark green shade, and I've put that onto all the skin. Let it thoroughly dry over a couple of hours, and then we're moving into an agrax earthshade onto the rest of the model. So 2 different shades being put on the same model. Not something I do very often, but something I think works really well, and it also blends it into the bases, again, that I've spoken about before. So now you've got to get every part of the model isn't skin covered in this, and then leave it really thoroughly to dry, and then showing you on the boss again, this is what we get left with. Now actually, in many ways you could leave this entire model like this and it would be actually perfectly acceptable, but what I'm starting on now, I've mixed on here on a fresh sheet of paper in my homemade wet palette the same 3 colours, so the dark green, the light green and the flesh, and then done a mix between the dark green, the flesh, and the dark green and the light green. And now we're going to do just some extra work on the skin. If you don't feel confident for this part, because we're going to do a little bit of wet blending, you could just absolutely leave it as it is and it would look fine, but it can be worth really just trying it and pushing yourself out of that comfort zone occasionally. And this was a little bit out of the comfort zone for me, because I've not painted an orc for more years than I care to remember, so tried something new. And the idea of using a human skin tone on an orc is something very new to me. So see, what I've done is I've taken the original dark green and just put it on some of the raised areas where the light would hit. That's kind of normal process. Then I've taken that flesh and dark green mix, dropped that into where the scars are, gone back to the original dark green, and then put that onto the flesh just on the outside of the scar and pulled it onto the rest of the model. And where the paint is still wet, you're going to blend that in across the arm and the musculature around that. And then really from this point it's now playing. So you would then do what would be a normal highlighting stage, where you would take the mix of the dark green and the light green, drop that onto the raised areas of the muscle, not covering the whole thing, leaving the crevice and the crack that's got the shade in and the darker area in, leaving that showing and just you working on the raised areas. And then maybe you'll take the really bright green and put it on the really raised areas. The difference here, from I suppose to normal, is we're adding in a totally separate colour, and we're adding in that flesh tone that's going to go into the scar. Look, give it a go. As long as you're using very thin watered layer of paint on there, which wet palettes are ideal for because it'll water it down slightly for you. But if you're using a normal palette, just drop a bit of water in there, sort of 50-50 water to paint. You'll have to play, depending on the paint brand you're using, you need more or less water. As long as you're doing it thin coats, if you go horribly wrong at this stage, that's not a problem. You can go back to the original base coat of the green and you can start again. It's if you start putting real thick layers of paint on that you'll give yourself a problem. But have a play. I didn't know how this was going to work when I started painting this, because this is not a paint mix I've ever used before. But have a go. That's the joy of doing this hobby, is you can play and just see where you get. So now I'm going again, doing the same thing I did at the top of the arm, down at the bottom of the arm, putting that flesh and green mix into the scars at the bottom, and also then working it actually up the arm because it's still wet a bit, and I'm just blending some of that green in and just playing till it looks nice, and I think I'm comfortable with what that end result is. And again, I quite enjoyed it. Now what I didn't do is I didn't do this on every single orc, because although I quite liked it on the leader, I did quite like the effect it made. For me, orcs traditionally, they don't have human skin tones in them, so I couldn't quite get over that. So I did it on a few of the scars across the rest of the commandos, put it on the scars and things, but didn't go to this depth of level across all the models, because although I enjoyed doing it, wasn't for me to roll it out across the rest of my commandos, but actually almost makes the leader stand out even more, that he's got a slightly different skin tone to what the rest of them have. And there's nothing wrong with doing that when you're painting models. Put extra effort into your leader, or do something that makes your leader look slightly different to the rest of them. He's scarred up, he's got slightly different skin colour, he's obviously had a bit more work put into him, so nothing wrong with doing that at all. And actually I really like how the gang kind of looks together, and the tones do blend across really well. So moving on, after you've done this, we then move on to just finishing the rest of the models off. I've said before, you don't need to do any of these stages, because actually after the ink wash layer they're looking really nice, but definitely worth just going back over the original colours you've already used and picking out some sort of edge highlighting, or just on the areas where the light would hit. So going around here, you can see we're doing it with the red. I'm also doing a couple of micro batch colours at the same time here. So whereas before you'd see me do with the red on every single model, what I'm doing now is I'm doing the red, but on the same palette I've also dropped down some of the bone. Might seem slightly strange doing red and bone in the same session, because obviously if you don't clean your brush properly you'll end up painting pink onto the model. As long as you clean your brush in between, that's fine. And I find when you're just at the highlight stage, I enjoy, rather than going through every single model with one colour, I'll go through the models with two colours on the palette. I'll work on two colours at once and just quickly clean the brush, in between. But I do find it worth going through and just putting a highlight layer on. Just lifts the model that little bit more. But again, perfectly fine to not do that. And now in this highlighting session, I'm working with three colours. So I'm working with the brown that we've used on the clothing, I'm working with the green grey we've used on the webbing, and I'm working with the kind of army green we've used on the trousers, and the same method as the red we just talked about, just the areas where the light has hit. Now if you look at this model here, it looks like there are multiple tones across him already, so just this extra highlight layer with only the same colours we've already used just really makes it pop and stand out. I hope you can see there that it now looks like we've put some fairly significant effort into these models, but actually this stage is very, very quick. The base coating of all these models I did over the course of maybe 5-6 evening sessions, so it probably took 5 or 6 hours to do the base coats. After the ink wash stage and things, to do this highlight layer maybe took an hour to do all the models. So it is a fairly quick method, because you're only picking certain bits out, and actually, if the legs are covered by how the guns are being held on the model and things, don't bother. So it really is just pick out what you think is going to be seen. And it's also a good opportunity to correct mistakes, this layer, or areas where the wash has settled into more. And now we're basically done. We're at the finishing stages. So I glued all the orcs onto just small plastic bases with a tiny dot of super glue, so it holds them on while you're using them on the painting handles. But now pop them off, and I'm putting them on bases that I've made to match the octarius terrain. So you may have seen that video, I've mentioned it twice already in this one. If you haven't seen it, check that one out. But these are custom bases I've done to make the bases match the octarius terrain. So I've quickly pop those models off the base we've painted them on, bit of super glue, and drop them onto the bases that we've made. So if you are going to do that technique though, tiny bit of super glue, only do it on one foot, otherwise it becomes a nightmare to pop them off. And here's the finished gang. You've seen it in the first little spin round as the video started, but here it is on with the scenery that I made. Again, I'll link the video down below for the scenery video if you want to check that out. But I'm really happy with the gang. I really like how it turned out. Really nice to paint orcs, having not done so for a number of years. And look, yeah, just something different that I tried as well, which is always nice to do. Just go out of the comfort zone or go out from what you standardly do. So if you enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, and I'll see you in another video.